Alright, so just as with reverse engineering geometric design, it helps if you do some beforehand. Playing with drawing knots and creating these plated work designs helps to understand their structure and to reverse engineer them. So it helps, if you play with some examples, to think about what's causing things. We have these grids of dots, these grids of squares. Now, if you think about, actually this is a bad example, it's a different experiment. If you think about what you're seeing here, the holes in the knots, right, the gaps, the spaces, occur from both types of dots, the primary grid and also the secondary grid. The secondary grid is responsible for these divots, if you will. And the divots, right, these secondary dots aren't in the same line as the primary dots. So if you look at how these gaps in the plated design are staggered, and we go over here, we see there's a gap, and there's some gaps, gap. Well, what do we see here? Well, you can imagine placing some circles. That would be a secondary grid, and then this would be the primary grid right in there. 2, and then 3, and then 2, and then 3. It's a little crooked, maybe. So just like here, where notice another fact: 1, 2, 3 primary dots, 1, 2, 3, 4 secondary dots. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. The secondary dots, sort of a column, has one more dot. So it's by having examples of plate work that we can start to understand how this might be created. Okay, so it looks like there's 2 rows of boxes in here. All right, so let's think then. So these indicate the borders, right? The secondary grid that occurs on the divisions between boxes. So there's a division, there's a division, there's a division. And looking at these little sort of divots, division, division. So that leaves 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now you don't have to recreate them. In this case, what I'm asking for in these questions is just that you are able to come up with the grid dimensions and a grid of break lines that work. But one of the things that is nice about these sorts of activities is that you can check your work. Now this is a pretty simple bit of plate work. All the middle here is just your usual plating. It's woven together. There's no break lines in here. But there's something at the end. Usually when we're playing with knots, and by usually that only means something is if you've done some examples thus far. So you have to generate some experience that you can draw upon for interpreting these. So if you think about just the end of some row of knots, well, when you put your parallel pairs in there, what happens at the end? Well, usually we have some corners, right? We don't have the corner there. What happens instead? Well, there's a bit of a gap, right? Instead of these 2 black dots, there's a big one there. And well, what's happening to this? We go over here. Oh, it turns around. So it does something like this. So this is the gap. This is the picture. Why is this band turning? Well, there must be a break line in here. Okay, well, break lines go between dots. So maybe right there. And then again, you can test these hypotheses out. If you have an idea, you don't have to do the entire knot. You can just put in some of it. And I saw a bunch of you doing this. You can put in some of it to see if it works. So that band is a break line. It's going to have to turn around. And what's going to happen up here? Well, these bands come in. They can't connect. So depending on how you want to present this, you're going to have a band that comes up, goes down to the bottom, and then continues, just like the knot. So yeah, this is 2 by 6 with a pair of break lines. That's how you would do that one. Excuse me. Now this one is a little bit more complicated, right? But again, let's look at these divots. Those divots are where the secondary grid dots show up. So all right, I have a bunch of dots here, and it looks like a circle, maybe a circle and a circle. So 1, 2, so it'll be one up top, one at the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so that might mean that I'm looking for maybe 4 somehow in between. Might be they're going to be staggered, right? Now the tricky thing here is that I'm in an area where there are clearly some break lines. Why is this band turning itself right around? Well, something's stopping it, right? So if I have 5 dots in my secondary grid, then 4 dots in my primary grid, those dots must be linked together. Not right here, because the knots pass through, but there's something blocking things here. And then, right, go over here, another secondary grid, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there must be some sort of 4 in here, maybe, right? Like 1 there, 1 there, I don't know, or 1 there, 1 there. The idea when you're doing this isn't that, again, like the constructions, that you get it all at once. It builds an idea. So the idea that's forming is that, well, if I have 5 secondary dots, it's probably a grid that's 4 rows. So let's create an example. I don't have to recreate the whole knot. I'm just going to make part of the knot and try out some of the ideas to see if I've got it. And if I can replicate part of this design, I can probably figure out the entire thing. All right, so maybe something like that. So whoops, I don't have quite enough here actually. So 4 rows. So then, I'm imagining that I have this primary grid of 4 boxes. I'm not worrying about how long this grid is yet. I'm just trying to figure out this particular set of break lines. And you don't have to shade in these dots. I'm shading them in so that we can have an unambiguous conversation about primary grids. The primary grid of dots are the centers of these boxes, which correspond to the sona that we looked at. All right, and then I have these hollow circles, which I call the secondary grid. All right, so now the question is going to be, I'm making part of a grid, it's not the entire thing, and I want to test these ideas out and see if they make sense. Now, what's making this strand, one, it's not going down, right? There's something blocking it here, and then there's something blocking it here, and there's something blocking it here. This part here looks to me to be between primary grid, something like that. And then it can't be this, right? If it were this, if I were to connect those, then I wouldn't have this strand escaping. So that can't be it. So it must be kind of offset. So maybe between a secondary. So this is my idea. And then it looks like I've got something down here too. So I'm not just trying to be silly here. I haven't actually figured this knot out yet. It seemed to me to be a reasonable knot, and so I gave it to you to work on. So I'm figuring this out in real time. Now notice there's some symmetry here, right? So I have this one, I have this. So over here. And then what else? It looks like it's repeating, right? So I'm going to do a couple of these, and I'm going to try it out and see if it makes sense. Can I go a little further here? Maybe like that. All right. So, actually, maybe I'll just put in a wee bit more here, so I can try it out a little further. So I'm going to pause the video and fill this grid in because it takes a minute. Why don't you, fill in too as well? Oh, I forgot to turn back on again. So I filled in a bunch of it here, and I wanted to do the connecting with you. So if you get lost in these dots, and if this is mentally straining, then hopefully that justifies why it's in your class. The idea is that this can be difficult work. This can be tricky work. Put a little dot there. All right, so let's see how to work this in the break lines. Well, again, if we're coming in, if we have a pair of parallel lines here, and we come into this corner, we have to follow the contours of the corner. But then as we're coming out, there's another break line right here. So what do? We may have to extend our grid a little bit more. So there'll be a parallel pair right there. So we're just following where the lines have to go. Right? So these break lines and these grids are forcing a certain outcome. What about here? What's happening here? Well, I have this band. I can't go through. There's a break line, so I have to go around like that. Same thing down here. I come under this band. There's a break line, another break line, so I have to curve around this corner. So we're just filling in some parts here. We're going to see if our conjectures make any sense. And then I've got a bunch of banding here that's really easy to fill in. They're just straight lines. So far it's turning out pretty decently. And what about here? What's happening here was a break line, so that has to curve around. It goes under this band, and then it's up top here. It has nowhere to go. It can't leave the grid. It's got a break line there, so it's going to have to reconnect over here. And sometimes this is a fancy sort of connect the dots. Where are these things going? Well, and let's see, where is this one going? Well, it's a break line, so it has to go around. So something like this. It goes under. There's a break line, so it has to flow out. Now again, if you're not practicing just making ordinary knots or experimenting, this will be harder. Practice generally makes things easier to do. So if you get stuck on one of these things, then it's probably a good idea to practice some. Again, I can't go up here, break line. I start going down. There's another break line over here. So, I get something like this. Now I'm at the bottom. I have to connect over here. So, something like that. We'll do one more here. Break lines. So, I think this will be enough to determine whether we're on the right track. So look what we've got so far over here, and look what we've got over here. Right, we've got a line come in and go back, yep, and come in and go back. Same thing over here. Right, this would we would probably have some other break line over here somewhere. What would that be? We'd have another parallel pair there. So it would be something like that. So we're getting these long stretches here. So yeah, looks like we've figured out our break lines. Now if you were doing this for homework or something, and you did your experiment, you wouldn't have to erase it. I'd be okay if you were to take a Sharpie and really clearly indicate those break lines. That's fine. This forms a puzzle where we're trying to work out a puzzle here. We're looking at a design which is based on some underlying structure, and we're trying to figure out what that underlying structure is. I think I'll have to make a separate video for this one. I talk too much, and I can only do 15-minute videos. So I'll pause here. Or actually, I didn't do the grid dimensions yet. So consider that this upper part right here is a primary dot. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I've only traced 4 here. So this section here would involve a grid of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or primary dots here. I think I'm mixing dots up a little bit. Oh, no, there's another primary dot, sorry. So 1, 2, 3, 4.